What kind of manager tells a waitress to ignore a table until they leave? Gregory Preston muttered under his breath as he stood outside the 14th location of his diner chain, staring through the rain-specked window. He'd built the company from the ground up over 20 years, starting with a tiny roadside cafe and a grill that barely worked. Now, there were 14 locations across 3 states. But lately, customer reviews had taken a hit, especially about this spot. Cold food, rude service, long waits. It didn't feel like the place he built anymore. He didn't want second-hand explanations. He needed to see it for himself. So, he shaved his beard, wore thick-rimmed glasses, dyed his hair gray, and walked with a slight limp. He'd say he was a veteran, just passing through town. He even got one of his old army buddies to lend him a faded jacket with a unit patch. Nobody here had ever met him in person. The staff knew his name, but not his face. He stepped inside. The place was half full, but no one greeted him. A waitress passed by without looking. A guy behind the counter manager probably was joking loudly with a server, ignoring the people waiting to pay. Greg took a booth near the back, quietly watching. 10 minutes passed. Nothing. He cleared his throat. A young couple at the next table whispered about how long they'd been waiting too. Then someone finally approached. "Hey there, sorry for the wait." A young waitress gave him a tired smile. Her name tag read Reyna. "We're short-staffed tonight. I'm doing double shifts." Her voice was gentle, and her eyes actually met his. "No worries," Greg said. "I can wait." She nodded, scribbled on her pad. "Can I get you a coffee while you look over the menu?" "Please." As she walked off, he noticed her limp slightly. Old injury? Or just exhaustion? He watched as she bussed her own tables, brought out plates, and took orders, clearly covering for others. Meanwhile, the guy behind the counter still hadn't moved. Greg muttered, "Unbelievable." Reyna returned with coffee and set it down carefully. "You from around here?" "Just passing through. Used to serve. Army." Her face lit up. "My grandpa too. Vietnam." "Thank you for your service." He nodded, unsure how to respond. She took his order, and he watched her hustle, nonstop checking on guests, refilling drinks, running food. She apologized to a family for the wait, offered free apple pie. She even helped calm a crying toddler while the mom ate a few peaceful bites. Greg could feel that she was holding this place together. His burger came out cold. She noticed before he even said anything. "I'm so sorry," she said, picking up the plate. "I'll get you a new one." "That's not okay." "It's all right." "No, it's not," she said firmly, disappearing into the kitchen. That's when he saw the manager finally emerge. Tall, loud voice, greasy apron. "Reyna," the manager snapped. "Stop comping stuff. We're not running a charity." "This one was cold, Todd." "I don't care. Kitchen's backed up. Tell em to deal." Reyna didn't argue. She just sighed, took the new plate, and brought it over to Greg. "Hope this one's better." He nodded. "Thanks. And listen, you all right?" She hesitated. "Just tired. Rent's up. My sister's kid is sick. But I'll be all right." He didn't ask more. She clearly wasn't the type to complain. He reached for his wallet at the end of the meal, but Reyna gently placed her hand on his. "No charge." Greg blinked. "What?" "You served. You shouldn't have to pay to eat alone. It's the least I can do." He stared at her. "You sure?" She nodded. "Don't tell my manager." Greg chuckled softly. "I won't." He left a $50 bill tucked under the plate, walked out into the night, and sat in his car for a long time. Rain hit the windshield. He'd come to catch bad behavior, and he had. But he hadn't expected Reyna. She didn't know she'd just bought dinner for the man who owned all 14 locations. Greg returned the next morning just before sunrise, slipping in through the side door used by kitchen staff. He wore the same jacket, an old duffel bag over his shoulder. This time, he wasn't a customer. He'd arranged through a staffing agency to be hired as a dishwasher under the alias Gary Peters. No one questioned it. The manager hadn't updated the employee files in months. Half the kitchen staff didn't know who was on payroll and who wasn't. Inside, the prep cook, a wiry guy in his early 40s named Marcus, looked up from chopping onions. "You the new guy?" he asked without looking up again.
"Yeah, Gary."
"Grab an apron. Sink's yours." Greg tied one on, stepped behind the dish pit, and got to work. The sink was already half full with crusted plates from the night before. The stench of old grease and sour milk clung to the corners of the room. No one had cleaned under the counters in weeks. At 7:30, the kitchen began moving.
Orders came in.
Line cooks shouted over each other. Greg kept his head down, rinsing and stacking, observing. The air was hot and heavy. A fan in the corner clicked uselessly. No one acknowledged him much except Marcus, who worked with practiced rhythm but coughed every few minutes into his elbow. "You all right?" Greg asked during a lull. "Yeah," Marcus muttered. "Just allergies." But Greg noticed him taking shallow breaths and wiping sweat from his forehead even when he wasn't near the grill. By 8, Reyna walked in through the back, her hair tied up, carrying a grocery bag. She placed it in a storage cubby. Inside was a plastic container of soup and a pack of diapers. Marcus nodded toward her. "She always brings food for that kid. Sister's kid. Poor little guy's had pneumonia for weeks." Reyna glanced toward Greg and gave him a polite nod. "You the new dishwasher?"
"Yeah, Gary."
"Welcome to the circus." She tightened her apron and disappeared out front. At 9, the breakfast rush hit in full force. Greg heard the clatter of plates, the buzz of conversation, and the bark of orders from Todd, the manager. He shouted table numbers and complaints from customers, but never lifted a hand to help. Greg stepped out from the dish area briefly and watched him lean against the host stand, sipping a soda while Reyna refilled 5 cups at once and took down 2 orders. A busboy barely 16 tried to carry a tub of dirty plates but tripped, dropping it with a loud crash. Todd didn't flinch. "Pick it up, kid," he said, eyes still on his phone. Reyna knelt to help the busboy, whispering something that made him nod and smile slightly, then disappeared into the kitchen with the bin balanced on one arm. That afternoon, Greg took his lunch break in the alley behind the building. Marcus joined him, lighting a cigarette with shaking fingers. "You been here long?" Greg asked. "Too long." "Why stay?" Marcus shrugged. "Got a daughter in college. Tuition doesn't pay itself." The back door creaked open. Reyna stepped out, holding a styrofoam container. She handed it to Marcus. "You didn't eat again?" "Not hungry. You've said that 3 days in a row." He took the food but didn't thank her. He just nodded and looked away. She turned to Greg. "How's your first day?" "Hot." "Loud." She laughed softly. "That's accurate." Greg studied her posture. Her shoulders slumped more than yesterday. Her eyes were red around the edges. "You work a double yesterday?" "Closed, then open today. Todd said we couldn't afford to call in anyone else." Greg frowned. "You get overtime?" She hesitated. "We're supposed to, but the last 2 weeks, my checks have been short. Todd says it's a system error, but payroll hasn't fixed it." Greg's jaw tightened. "You tell someone higher up?" Her expression dimmed. "Nobody ever returns the calls. I left 2 voicemails for corporate last week. Nothing." Back inside, the afternoon dragged. The AC unit above the line cook station sputtered and died. Sweat dripped down everyone's backs. Greg watched 2 cooks argue over a misfired order. One of them, Jesse, was so frustrated he threw a spatula across the kitchen and stormed out the back. No one followed him. Todd wandered in 10 minutes later. "Where's Jesse?" "Walked out," Marcus muttered. Todd rolled his eyes and pulled out his phone again. "Bunch of babies." As dinner approached, Reyna's pace slowed. She leaned against the prep table between orders, rubbing her temples. Greg noticed her wince each time she turned her neck. He stepped over. "You all right?" "Just tension. I've been doing side work, bussing, running food, plus tables. I'll be fine." "Anyone else helping run the floor?" She shook her head. "It's just me and Peter. He started last week." Greg glanced into the dining room. Peter was fumbling with the register, clearly overwhelmed. A woman at the counter tapped the glass repeatedly, trying to pay. Todd ignored her. Greg walked over. "Excuse me," he said, still using his Gary voice. "That woman's been trying to cash out for 10 minutes. Todd didn't look up. "Not my job. I'm not a cashier. You're the manager." Todd narrowed his eyes. "You want to do something about it, dishwasher?" Greg stared at him a moment too long, then nodded.
Yeah.
"I think I just might." He stepped behind the counter and helped the customer ring out. She gave a tired smile. "Thanks. It's always chaos in here." "I'm starting to notice," he said quietly. Later that night, Greg stayed after close to help mop the kitchen. Reyna was on her knees scrubbing baseboards. "You shouldn't have to do that," Greg said. "No one else will." "Why not leave?" She sat back on her heels. "Because I can't afford to. And I care. I care about the guests. About the staff. Someone has to." Greg nodded slowly. "You ever think about managing?" She laughed once, without humor. "Todd would never allow that. Besides, I don't have a degree." He considered her answer, then said, "You don't need a degree to lead." Reyna looked at him for a moment. "You're not just a dishwasher, are you?" Greg paused, then shook his head.
No.
"But I needed to see this place for myself." She stood slowly. "Who are you?" Greg wiped his hands on a towel, walked to the middle of the kitchen and called out, "Everyone, can I have your attention?" The room froze. Even Todd looked up from his phone. "I'm Gregory Preston," he said. "Founder and owner of this company." Silence. Marcus dropped the cigarette he was about to sneak out with. Reyna stared, mouth slightly open. Todd blinked twice, then stepped forward. "Sir, if I'd known, you would have done your job differently?" Greg snapped, voice sharp. "You allowed this place to rot under your watch. You ignored customers, mistreated staff, and let payroll errors go unresolved. You let people work double shifts without proper support. You failed every standard I built this company on." Todd's face flushed. "Sir, I was under the impression you're done." Todd's mouth opened again, but Greg cut him off. "Hand over your keys. You're terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you out." Greg turned to Reyna. "You're the reason this place is still standing. Starting tomorrow, you'll be interim floor manager. Full pay. Benefits. We'll talk about permanent placement soon." Her hands trembled. I don't even know what to say." "Say you'll keep doing what you've been doing. Just with the authority you've earned." Greg looked around the room. "Things are going to change starting now. And I'll be back. Regularly." No one clapped. No one cheered. But in the heavy silence, Greg saw something better. Hope. The morning after the reveal, Greg sat in the back office with a clipboard and a legal pad, sleeves rolled up, a cup of bitter coffee beside him. The room still smelled faintly like stale grease and something sour in the carpet. He hadn't changed anything, yet he wanted to see how the staff worked without Todd's presence first. Reyna stepped in quietly, holding a notebook and a pen. She looked like she hadn't slept much, but her hair was tied back neatly, and her name tag now had a fresh sticker beneath it. Interim floor manager. "You wanted to go over the schedule?" she asked.
Yeah. Sit down.
"Let's walk through what's working and what's not." She pulled up the folding chair across from him. "We're short 2 servers. Jesse never came back and another girl quit a week ago. Peter's still learning. He's better on register than on the floor." Greg nodded. "And the busboy?"
Luis.
"He's 16. Shows up early, leaves late, never complains. But he's not supposed to be lifting some of the stuff he's lifting. He's doing prep work when Marcus gets behind. Greg wrote down his name. Has anyone trained him properly?
No.
He was hired a month ago and just figured things out. Greg leaned back in his chair. All right, let's start by getting him moved into a prep role part-time. I'll get someone in from another location to backfill busing. Reyna hesitated. That would help. But the real issue's not just bodies. It's the way things are handled when they go wrong. People stopped speaking up. No one thought anyone was listening. Greg tapped his pen against the legal pad. They are now. She tilted her head. You sure you want to fix this place? You've got bigger locations with better margins. Most CEOs would write this one off. I built this company with my hands. I'm not writing off anything. She gave a small nod, then stood. I'll get the floor ready. As the morning shift began, Greg stayed off to the side, observing. Staff were quieter than usual, glancing his way, but not approaching. The tension hadn't broken, yet they were waiting to see if yesterday was a fluke. Peter was at the register again, fumbling with a return. Greg walked over. You having trouble? Peter looked up nervously. A customer paid cash, and the drawer's short 10. I think I gave the wrong change. Let's look at the log. Greg stepped behind the counter and helped him double-check the entries. You've got the right count, but the drawer was already off from last night. Peter looked embarrassed. I didn't want to say anything. I thought I'd get blamed. You won't. From now on, log every shift start amount. If it's off, call it out. That's not on you. Peter nodded quickly. Thanks. I wasn't sure if I should even still be here. You showed up. That counts. By mid-morning, Greg pulled Marcus aside in the kitchen. The man was pale, sweat darkening the collar of his shirt. You need a break, Greg said. Marcus gave a weak laugh. What? Now we get breaks. Greg didn't flinch.
Yes.
Now we do.
Sit down.
Reyna's going to cover your station. Marcus reluctantly sat on a milk crate near the back door. Greg brought him a bottle of water. I want to talk about your shift. You've been doing more than your role. Marcus took a long drink before answering. I started doing prep when the last guy quit. Then I was checking orders, then covering for the fry station. I just didn't want to see it fall apart. You've been cooking with a respiratory issue. Marcus wiped his mouth with his sleeve. It's not contagious. That's not the point. You're lightheaded. You're sweating through your shirt. I can't afford to call out. Greg sat down beside him. You're getting a paid week off. Starting tomorrow. I'll have someone cover. Marcus looked at him warily. For real?
Yes.
I'll make sure it's in writing. Go to the clinic. Get checked out. Bring back the note when you're ready. Marcus nodded slowly. All right. Then yeah, I will. Reyna peeked through the kitchen window. Greg?
Got someone asking for you.
She says she's your operations director. Greg stood. Send her in. A woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a pressed navy blazer stepped into the kitchen, heels clicking against the tile. You called for me?
Ava. Good.
Thanks for coming. She gave the room a once-over. This place is a war zone. Which is why I need you here for at least a month. We're restructuring, training, and rehiring. She raised an eyebrow. This isn't a rescue mission. You sure this location's worth it? Greg pointed toward the dining area, where Reyna was helping Peter with a guest complaint. It is. Ava followed his gaze.
All right.
Let's get to work. By late afternoon, Greg gathered the staff after close. Everyone stood in the dining area tired, wary, but attentive. I'm not going to give you a speech, he started. You've lived through enough broken promises. He looked around the room. But I will say this. I was here yesterday, and I saw people doing their best in a bad system. That ends now. He pointed to a stack of forms on the counter. First, everyone's getting a wage review. You'll sit with Ava over the next 2 days, and we'll correct pay discrepancies. If you've been shorted, you'll be made whole. Peter blinked. Even retroactively? Greg nodded. Yes. He turned to Reyna. Second, Reyna's interim manager for now, and I trust her judgment. She'll be building her own team. If you've been pulling your weight, you're safe. If you've been skating by. He let the thought hang. Luis raised his hand. And the ones who quit already? We'll reach out. If they left because of what was happening here, they'll have the chance to return. Ava stepped forward. Also, we're bringing in an HR liaison from headquarters. Any harassment, discrimination, or abuse, zero tolerance. Reyna crossed her arms. What about hiring? We're still stretched. Greg gestured to a corkboard. Post your needs. Ava will handle approvals. A woman in her 50s, Clarice, who'd mostly kept to herself, spoke up from the back. And maintenance? That cooler's been leaking for weeks. Greg turned to Ava. Put it on the list. Clarice blinked. Seriously? Seriously. After the meeting, most of the staff lingered. They didn't rush out like usual. A few sat in booths, talking quietly. Clarice brought out her own mop and started cleaning under the soda machine without being asked. Greg stood near the entrance, watching. Reyna joined him. They're waiting to see if it sticks.
It will.
You know, she said slowly, when I gave you that free meal, I thought I was breaking the rules. You were, Greg replied. But you broke the right ones. She smiled faintly. I didn't expect any of this. I didn't expect to find someone holding the place together with duct tape and goodwill either. Peter walked by, carrying a clipboard. Reyna, that lady from corporate wants me to redo the drawer logs. She nodded. Go ahead. I'll help you sort it. Greg watched him disappear into the office, then turned back to her. You ever think about what kind of leader you want to be? She glanced at the dining room. One who listens. One who doesn't disappear. Greg nodded. Good start. She looked at him. You staying long? He shook his head. I'll be back in 3 days. But I've seen what I needed to see. She reached into her apron and pulled out a small card. I found this in the lost and found. From your meal that night. Greg took it. It was the receipt and signed, corners stained with coffee. Written on the back in small, neat handwriting were 5 words. Hope this place finds you. He folded it and slid it into his pocket. I think it already has. Greg returned to the diner 3 days later, just after lunch. No disguise. No alias. Just khakis, a collared shirt, and the same boots he used to wear when inspecting his first location back in the early days. It was quieter now, but not sluggish. Tables turned smoothly. The air still smelled like fried onions and coffee, but the tension had thinned. Reyna stood near the pass, clipboard in hand, jotting notes while Peter rang out a family at the register. Clarice was restocking creamers and sugar packets at the beverage station. The place looked cleaner. Not perfect, but cared for. Greg stepped into the kitchen and scanned the prep area. Luis was slicing tomatoes in a clean apron, his movements precise. A new busser, a tall kid with braces and careful eyes, swept under the booths. Ava approached from the back, sleeves rolled up, clipboard under her arm. You're on time. Greg nodded. You get the payroll adjustments through? Everyone signed. Retroactive pay distributed. We had to push it through accounting manually, but it's done. He motioned toward the front. Any fallout? A few staff from other locations have been calling HR, asking why this store got raises. Word spreading. Good, Greg said. Let it. They walked into the back office where Reyna joined them, setting the clipboard down. Her shirt was pressed, and a walkie was clipped to her belt. There was still fatigue in her face, but the kind that came from effort, not defeat. Inventory's been updated, she said. We're short on syrup and sandwich wraps, but I've got a transfer coming from the Eastfield location. Greg raised an eyebrow. You coordinated a cross-store transfer? Peter's cousin works there. Made a few calls. Ava leaned against the desk. She's been managing vendor calls too. The produce guy refused to deliver until we cleared the unpaid invoices. Reyna negotiated a partial drop with a payment plan. Greg looked at her. You did that on your own? I had to. We were out of lettuce. Greg sat back in the chair. You want the role permanently? Reyna didn't answer right away. I didn't think I did.
But now? Yeah.
I do. But only if I can do it right. You won't be babysitting broken systems anymore, Greg said. You'll have authority to hire, budget oversight, and weekly check-ins with Ava. No more trying to patch holes without tools. Ava opened a folder. We've also documented the prior mismanagement. Todd's behavior was part of a pattern. There's been a formal termination and a report filed with labor compliance. Reyna's expression didn't change. He ever try to come back in? Ava shook her head. He won't. Not here, not anywhere near this company. Greg stood. Then we moved forward. Later that afternoon, Greg walked the floor with Reyna, watching the ebb and flow. A couple near the windows flagged her down, complimented the speed of service. A teenager at table 7 asked if she could apply for a weekend position. Reyna took down her contact info on the spot. You're building trust, Greg said. Not just me. They've all stepped up. Clarice passed by with a cart of clean mugs. She paused. Reyna, we good to swap the decaf? It's been half full for 2 hours. Yeah, go ahead. Greg watched her walk off. She's sharp. She doesn't waste words, but she notices everything. As the dinner rush approached, Greg stepped into the kitchen. Marcus had returned, sleeves rolled up, a clean bill of health in his pocket, and a new pair of non-slip shoes. He worked the grill with calm efficiency, coordinating with Luis without needing to speak. There was rhythm now. Not perfect, but purposeful. Greg waited until they hit a lull. You good? He asked. Marcus nodded. Better than I've been in months. Anything you need? Marcus looked up. A freezer light that doesn't flicker. And a backup on weekends. Done. At the host's stand, a woman in her 60s approached Reyna. Her blouse was pressed, and she held a notepad. You took care of my granddaughter last week. She was here with her mom. You brought her an extra juice and helped her pick a pie. Reyna blinked. I remember. She wouldn't stop talking about you. Said you were the nicest waitress she'd ever met. Reyna smiled slowly. Thanks. That means a lot. She drew you this. The woman handed over a folded piece of construction paper. Crayon drawings of a pie, a smiling face, and the word, thank you, were scribbled across the front. Reyna's voice caught in her throat. Tell her I said thank you. Greg watched from a few steps back, then turned and walked to the office. Inside, he pulled out his phone and called his executive assistant. Get me a design consultant, he said. We're updating the place. New flooring, paint, proper ventilation. I want this location to set the bar. He hung up before she could ask why. The next morning, Greg returned before sunrise. A new sign was on the door. Now hiring team players only. Inside, the staff prepped quietly, the hum of conversation low but steady. Reyna handed out fresh shift sheets and walked the floor with quiet command. Peter approached Greg near the coffee station. I've been working on the refund logs. I think I figured out a way to track them better. Greg motioned for him to show him. As Peter explained, Reyna walked past, placing her hand briefly on Peter's shoulder. Nice work. Peter's voice didn't shake this time. Thanks. By noon, Greg stepped outside into the sunlight. The parking lot was half full. A delivery truck was backing in. 2 kids on bikes waited near the entrance, peeking inside like it was something new. Something worth checking out. Ava joined him a moment later. You sure you want to keep this one on your route? He nodded. It's not just a store. It's proof. She crossed her arms. We're going to need to do this at other locations. We will, one at a time, with the right people in charge. Ava looked back through the window. You think she knows how much she changed? Greg shook his head. Doesn't matter. Why not? Because she never stopped trying, even when nobody was watching. That's the kind of leadership you can't teach. They stood in silence a moment longer. Then Greg turned. I'll be back in a few weeks. But this time, I'll use the front door. Reyna stepped into view, laughing at something Clarice had said. The staff moved confidently around her, no longer just surviving but working like they belonged there. Greg opened his car door and glanced back one last time. The place looked different now. Not because the walls had changed, but because the people inside finally had someone who saw them.